Scott Rogers says, "Remember to never mistake story for gameplay, and similarly, never mistake gameplay for story." When considering Overwatch, a game with no story mode and a lot of gameplay, my first instinct is to say, it's just like a standard first-person shooter battle arena, like Fortnite, which we simply look at as a giant playground. However, the ad for this game would have you believe that there is a highly developed narrative surrounding the game.
As the world teetered on the brink of anarchy, a new hope arose. An elite international task force charged with ending the war and restoring liberty to all nations.
Scholars agree that there's no need for a story in these types of games. For instance, Rogers and the three pillars of game writing videos share a similar argument that out of plot, or what Rogers calls activities, character, and lore, games can effectively have one of these special things, maybe two. Any more than that, and it threatens to confuse the player. Overwatch does a great job on character. When we look at the other elements, lore and plot, it gets a little weird. The reason I chose Overwatch is because I've never encountered a game where its story was told outside of the gameplay through short films or even cutscenes that aren't attached to any gameplay whatsoever.
30 years ago, the Omnics declared war.
This cutscene is the first thing you see when you start up the game and could be easily skipped by pressing any button. Sebastian Domsch refers to this as a passive narrative text. These are expositions or cutscenes, movies, comics, novels, all outside of gameplay. In order to better understand Overwatch's relationship of narrative and gameplay, we need to take a step back. Overwatch was released in May of 2016 for PlayStation, Xbox, and Windows, with 21 characters and 12 maps. Up to October 2019, 10 new characters have been released and 9 new maps. Overwatch has gone on to become a massive community of 40 million players worldwide, have an official pro league, and fill YouTube with strategy videos, coaching, highlights, and streamers. It has become, without a doubt, what Constance Steinkuhler refers to as the Big G game. As both designed object and emergent culture, Big G games simultaneously function as both culture and cultural object, as microcosms for studying the emergence, maintenance, transformation, and even collapse of online affinity groups, and as talk-aboutable objects that function as tokens in public conversations of broader societal issues within contemporary offline society. In other words,
emerging gaming technologies operate within a nexus of social relationships that characterize the modern world.
Thank you, Shaya. So let's take a look at Overwatch from the player's perspective. As a new player, you'll most likely want to do the tutorial to get a feel for the controls. Through Salen and Zimmerman's modes of interactivity, let's analyze how Overwatch introduces us into its world.
Hello, Soldier 76. I am Athena. I will be guiding you through the Overwatch training program. Now, where is she?
Wait for me! Hiya! Tracer here!
Let's get started.
Before even giving us the controls, Overwatch has done something Salen and Zimmer would refer to as cognitive interaction. Cognitive interaction is the psychological, emotional, and intellectual participation between a person and a system. By giving us a third-person view of our character, then transitioning into first person, the game is quite literally putting us inside of our character's head. We have just become heroes, and now we must go through basic training.
Please use your controls to look at Tracer as she moves around the room.
Over here!
Our introduction to Tracer introduces us both to the functional and explicit interaction within this game. Functional interaction refers to the structural interactions with the material components of the system, such as the heads-up display. Explicit interaction is interaction in the obvious sense, such as the narrator telling us to use our controller to look over to Tracer. From here on out, however, the game narrator only addresses us through functional and cognitive
You
interaction.
can also move left and right.
For example, by addressing us as the character, telling us to move, we begin to interact with the game on a cognitive level.
Jump up.
Explicit interactions are reserved for that little tip box on the right, which will tell us the controls to use, such as press X to jump.
Welcome to the target range. Please proceed to the highlighted area. Your portrait is displayed in the lower left corner of your screen. That's you, Soldier 76. Next to it is your current health. If it reaches 0, you die. Your primary weapon is your heavy pulse rifle. I'll get you something to shoot at. Aim through the crosshairs in the middle of your screen. Move them over the training bot, then fire. Nicely done.
This is also where the game begins using actively nodal forms to interact with us as the player. By the timed responses of the narrator to the player's actions, the game is using what Domsh refers to as actively nodal forms. These are used a lot in multiplayer, so let's get out of the tutorial. To sum up this section of the game, basically, Overwatch is telling us what is important: our character and our combat. I'm sorry, I'm so inaccurate on PlayStation. I wish you could see me play on PC because I'd be hitting people left and right, but I don't know how to record it. Just try to cope with my inaccuracy, please. Wow, I move so fast through this menu system because it's designed to move fast. Players want to get in and get their competition on. Right now I'm entering competitive play, which only allows players levels 25 and up. The game puts you into a waiting room, which is just a meaningless skirmish until it finds you a game. Let's take a look at the first character choice that I've made when entering into competitive play. We have the choice between the character classes of tank, damage, and support, and the player's choice here will determine their playstyle. If they'd like to heal characters and focus less on damaging, they would choose support. If they'd like to be a very large character with not very much range, but a lot of damage power, they'd choose tank. And if the player wants to focus on doing damage to the other team, they will choose damage. This is what Abhinav Narain refers to as the informed choice. The informed choice will have influence on the gaming experience. However, the player has also been given the opportunity to learn a bit more about how the choices differ and how it might affect the trajectory of their game. Upon entering into a game, players are expected to make an informed decision on what character they'd like to play as. These are informed by the atoms that the game designers have put into each different character. Each character has different moves, different abilities that affect the gameplay differently, and the player is expected to choose the character that'll benefit their team the most. In this pre-game phase, while we wait for the timer to count down the beginning of the game, players interact with other players through a dialogue wheel with choices of preset dialogue options.
Are you scared?
Attackers incoming in 30 seconds.
Statistically speaking, I usually get most of my team back alive.
In regard to the role of emotions in video games, Carolyn Handler says the contribution of emotions can be extremely significant. They can make the work seem less computerized and more real, and add richness and dimension to the narrative. So what Overwatch has created is a form of communication without a mic, while talking through their own character. This allows the player to create their own story and their own relationships with the members of their team. This, along with the timed interactions that other characters by default will say,
"You know, McCree, the winning side would pay much better. Maybe buy yourself some real clothes."
My clothes? Have you seen some of the things Talon wears? I first need to read these for you.
This will heal you.
all equal to a very immersive social experience within Overwatch. It makes very much sense to me now that through Overwatch's well-developed characters and social multiplayer structure, there is simply no need to fill the other two pillars of lore and story. They are filled, however, very simply. The story of Overwatch, which is told through passive texts, is much like a superhero story such as Avengers. It is not very involved. It doesn't matter what happens. It matters how player and character interact. As Bob Bates told Jesse Shell, story and gameplay are like oil and vinegar. Theoretically, they don't mix, but if you put them in a bottle and shake them up real good, they're pretty good on a salad.